Good morning, everybody. My name is Joanne St. Goddard, and I'm the Executive Director of the Recycling Council of Ontario and the Circular Innovation Council. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone. We see that the numbers are continuing to climb. We have just over 200 registrants scheduled to participate with us today, so we're excited to see those numbers, and we're certainly pleased to present our speakers for today. So we're mindful that we are also competing with the President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration today. So hopefully you'll be able to catch part of that after the webinar. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I guess good morning and good afternoon, depending on wherever you may be joining us. We're excited to have guests from across the globe this afternoon. But we certainly want to give you a warm welcome and a thank you for joining our fourth and final webinar of our Circular Procurement virtual series. It is an official World Circular Economy Forum side event. As I mentioned, my name is Joanne St. Goddard, and I'm the Executive Director of both organizations that have collaborated to put on today's event. And it's certainly my pleasure to be part of supporting your journey towards advancing a circular economy wherever you are. Since we launched this series in November of 2020, we've had incredible and growing interests from not only across the country, but globally, recognizing the important opportunity to use procurement, effectively our buying power, to adopt and accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And we are also blessed to be able to engage you and welcome the opportunity to work with you to support this important work. So really part of the objective of having a series is to identify those across the globe that are recognizing procurement as a key delivery agent or mechanism to advance a circular economy, and hope that this is the start of a collaboration between us. Our series has focused on four main circular procurement topics, presented as a progression from concept to design to implementation, and now today, measurement. For those that are new to our series, a brief background on the Recycling Council of Ontario and the Circular Innovation Council. RCO was created in 1978, and for more than 40 years now, our interests and mission has stayed true to the elimination of waste. And I think we are probably most famous for our role in bringing public and private entities together to create, which is something which is now the gold standard in residential recycling, the curbside blue box program. So that really has been an end-of-life management solution to what has been a linear model of consumption and production based on take, make, and waste, where at that time our primary environmental objective was simply managing products and packaging at their end of life or at the end of this linear economy. So with those learnings and where the conversations globally are going on a circular economy and what that affords us, we in June launched the Circular Innovations Council, an organization that is building from a focus of waste elimination and broadening its lens to entire production and consumption models, and effectively how those need to be reconstructed to pursue a circular economy, which can deliver environment, economic, as well as social objectives simultaneously. We realized that as the RCO, we were evolving and championing tools and processes that went far beyond recycling to a true systems design change, and felt that we better expand that with an expanded scope and supporting burgeoning models of better resource efficiency, we needed to better represent them in name and in spirit. We are also seeing firsthand, taking hold in government and industry circles, recognition of how circularity delivers on broader public policy objectives and smarter business models that we have always advocated for. But the Circular Innovation Council aims to provide a platform or a place to support innovation and accelerate them. So to give you some background on the transition and what that means from a linear or existing economy to a circular one, we know that there are several definitions and several organizations bringing this to the forefront, and they may have slightly different definitions. But to us, the circular economy is best described as expanding the inherent value of goods and materials, which by design repurposes and circulates resources, elongates their life cycle and uses. The end result from this shift is, by design, less waste, less energy use, less virgin resource use, better efficiency, and ultimately more value of products and materials. The circular economy is a complete and holistic approach to resource efficiency that focuses on cradle to cradle, from design and function to end of life and everything in between, before and after. And most importantly, doesn't just balance, but in fact prioritizes environmental and social outcomes along with economic gains. So how does this align with procurement, and why are we interested? Public procurement presents a $1 billion opportunity in Canada, and of course, trillions worldwide, with harmonious opportunity for governments and the agencies they support and do business with to create demand that drives circular outcomes, aligned with stated broader economic, environment, and social public policy objectives that often include goals such as low carbon, less waste, equal opportunity, fair wages, and support for local business. Through circular procurement, these goals are prioritized at the same level as fiscal prudence. Conversely, public buyers have tremendous opportunity and influence on their supply chains, and therefore equal opportunity to also drive circularity. In addition to cost, buyers can and should choose supply chain partners based on how they do business and whether their impacts drive broader societal benefit. Aligning buying with value a product delivers rather than the product itself, or by changing product specifications to invest in attributes or functions that reduce environmental harms, governments and businesses alike will expedite our transition to a circular economy. Circular demand requires circular suppliers and products. And in our opinion, it all rests on how and why we buy and what we buy. Types of procurement have been discussed under certain vernacular. And while the concepts of sustainable procurement has been long influential and familiar to most, I would say to you that there are key differences when compared to circular procurement. Sustainable procurement is a tool that is used to inject or insert itself into a linear economy to reduce environmental harms, basically support a less harmful system that is still designed or built to take, make, and waste. Whereas circular procurement supports the complete rethink on need, value, use, and end-of-life management. It still supports economic and financial interest, but not by simply producing and consuming more, rather by producing and consuming differently. Circular economies challenge markets to deliver value in a different way. Markets can support a circular economy by adjusting their business models. These 5 business circular models aren't new by any stretch, but by framing or positioning them in the context of a circular economy truly demonstrates their value to better acquire and manage goods and services, from design to production to usage to end-of-life management. In short, aligning with the circular business models helps companies create value while adhering to circular principles and assists buyers to identify which business models they can leverage. Circular supplies, where inputs are sustainable. Resource recovery, where resources are captured to be integrated as supply. Product life extension, where materials are designed to last. Sharing platforms, where collaboration is emphasized. And product as a service, where supply is based on demand. To introduce and explain these models and greater circularity through procurement, we premiered this virtual series in November of 2020 with Buying Change with the Government of Canada, which purchases more than $22 billion worth of goods and services every year through their procurement process. To start a journey, you need a compass in hand and to set your direction. So we showcased a national approach to circular public procurement to meet several internal and external public policy outcomes, including low carbon economy and various domestic and international targets and commitments related to greenhouse gas emissions, but also waste reduction. We followed that up with Selling Change and showcased 3 leading organizations, HP Canada, Philips, and Ripe Office, that have embraced circular business models as an innovative service offering that support a circular economy, because buying change with circular demand requires circular supply. And our penultimate webinar, Identifying Opportunity, featured the United Kingdom and Cardiff, Wales in particular, as well as Budal, Norway, and Richmond, BC, who are offering various approaches for government bodies to recognize opportunities when and where and how to begin to actually incorporate circular procurement. And now that brings us to today's 4th and final webinar. It is amongst our most important and certainly our most involved aspect of circular economy as a mechanism to put circular concepts into action. Quantifying the influence of buying power to drive circularity and its benefits require key performance indicators and measurements through qualitative as well as quantitative information. In addition, setting the right performance indicators, assigning meaningful measurement criteria, evaluating these indicators on par with price, and monitoring adherence is pivotal to adopting circular business models and platforms. And to offer insight and expertise specific to this crucial aspect of circular procurement, we are so blessed to have with us today 2 leading edge experts in measuring success, who will share with us not only their expertise, but most importantly in this context, their experience in putting circular economic concepts into action, specifically a deeper explanation on how to redefine value, reconnect buying practices to deliver on that value, how to effectively establish those key performance indicators, and of course, measure success to accelerate the transition from a linear to a circular economy. So by way of process, and as a quick reminder, all of our webinars have been and will be recorded and available to you after today and through links that will be sent directly to you. They will include the verbal recordings as well as all of the slides on this webinar, as well as the webinars that came before it. We have, because we have a lot of registrants and participants today, we are asking that you use the chat function on your screen to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to be able to, through me as the facilitator, offer them up to our speakers. I'm told that there's a chat box as well if you're tuning in today watching us through YouTube as well. So just to go through a bit of the format before we launch into our first speaker. For today's format, we have 2 expert speakers, one from Canada and one from the Netherlands. What we're going to do is ask them to go through their PowerPoint presentations back to back, and then we will open it up to a Q&A session that I will help to moderate and facilitate. So as you think of your questions, don't wait, please pose them in the chat, and we'll do our best to triage them and get through them in our short 90 minutes. So with that in mind, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter. I have had the pleasure of learning and having many passionate exchanges with Mr. Bob Willard on procurement and asset management and driving environmental gains through that process. He hails from Whitby, BC, Ontario. To give you a bit of background on Bob, he is a leading expert on the subject matter today, measuring success and specifically quantifying and selling the business value of corporate sustainability strategies. He's given more than 1,000 presentations to corporations, governments, universities, and ENGO audiences alike. He is also an author of 6 books, 2 DVDs, business case workshop sheets, and extensive master slide set that offers capacity building resources for sustainability champions. Here to help guide you on defining value and measuring success, rooted in a 34-year career at IBM Canada, where he engaged the business community in proactively avoiding risk and capturing opportunities by using smart environmental, social, and governance strategies. I am pleased to turn the screen over to Mr. Bob Willard.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. As Joanne mentioned, I'm going to go through a bit of a PowerPoint overview of some tools that may help you figure out what the value of circular procurement is. So I'll share my screen, we'll go through those, and then I welcome your questions as we get into the webinar a little bit deeper. So honoring the subject of this as the fourth of the 4 webinar series, we're into trying to define how we know value if we saw it relative to procurement, and how to assess the success of our efforts to procure with circularity in mind. Let me start off by acknowledging one of the slides that was used by Joanne, that 5 business models of circularity. The 2 at the end, I think, are really, really important because what they suggest is maybe you shouldn't be procuring anything in the first place. So these are pre-procurement questions. So what they suggest is there's a bit of a dialogue that needs to take place between the procurement function and the user department that thinks they need something. And that is to just reassure each other that the product function is really still required, that it hasn't been re-engineered out of the process or can't be handled some other way. Secondly, is it something that maybe can be shared with another department internally, maybe externally as well, but usually internally? Thirdly, is there an option here to provide the function of the product through a product as a service vehicle, rather than acquiring something new, have it managed and made available to you by a third party? Could the project be provided by a pay-for-use service? And are there other ways to do this rather than buying something? Can you lease it, rent it, borrow it, whatever? So I think those are good questions to ask before we get into it. Why are they good questions? Because from a circularity perspective, we're trying to reduce waste, we're trying to reduce the use of virgin materials, and all of these will dematerialize the options that we have for providing the function that the user is looking for. So with that as a backdrop, once you decide, yes, we really do need something, then we get into the procurement of that something, the goods or services. I use the term sustainable procurement in a broader sense than a lot of people do, and it does include a lot of the considerations for circular procurement. So if you forgive me for using that as a synonym for circular procurement, I'll give you a quick overview of a free open source toolkit that may be useful to you. This toolkit has 3 Excel worksheets in it. One is a specification template, another one's a total cost of ownership tool. And then the last one, which is probably the most important one, is the bid evaluation tool. So I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of what those things are. Because as we get into circular procurement, we need to have specifications in the RFP that are that look for the attributes of a product that will reassure ourselves that they are honoring some of the design and objectives and attributes of sustainable procurement. So in terms of RFP specifications, it's pretty straightforward. These specifications are pretty normal. You have product related specifications and you have supplier related specifications. And as we get into circular or sustainable procurement, what we want to do is enhance those with some ideas that experts on these topics have provided, and make sure that when we're asking about the product performance and quality, we're talking about as well product sustainability related performance and content as well. And when we talk about the product cost, it's important that we include this total cost of ownership consideration, which I will come back to, as part of that thought. It's not just the low price, it's the best deal over an ongoing use of the product that's being acquired. And then the other one is the supplier's sustainability track record as a company, not so much relative to this product, but if you're going to do business with a supplier, you'd like to do business with sustainable suppliers, suppliers who are paying attention to their environmental and social footprint and improving their track record on that. So how are they doing on that? Do they give a hoot about this? Or if they do, how would we know, and how are they going to be self-assessed or assessed by a third party? So let me just drill down a little bit into a couple of these. In terms of attributes of the product that relate to sustainability or circularity, let me just give you a starter set of some of the things that you might want to look for. So some of the sample product criteria. On the performance side, how energy efficient, water efficient, et cetera it is, any waste that is normally produced as a result of using the product. Greenhouse gases being generated, huge issue, and should be these days. Efficiency in the way in which it uses supplies, et cetera. Design for accessibility, data security, privacy, more and more important as well. And then we get into product content criteria, and this is where we start to get into some of the circularity design, especially. Circular economy design in terms of its reusability, repairability, upgradability, disassembly, those kinds of things. Also in terms of the content. Is it recycled content, remanufactured content, renewable, biodegradable? So those attributes are really important from a circularity perspective. And it's important that those be requested in the RFP so that the bidder, the supplier, the vendor can inform you as to the extent to which the product or goods and services that they are recommending honor those kinds of considerations. Embedded carbon, embedded energy, embedded water, any harmful materials, traceability, packaging options, etc. So what I'm saying here is there's a whole bunch of stuff that we should be looking at from a sustainability perspective, from a circularity perspective, in terms of the attributes of the product content and performance. And it's important that we start to make those things matter, which gets into the way in which we weight the credit that we give to suppliers for these kinds of things. So one of the things that always comes up when we're talking about sustainable procurement or circular procurement, isn't this going to be kind of expensive? So we need to be able to reassure ourselves and others that we're not talking about ignoring the fact that there's a cost associated with acquiring this. In fact, we're talking about doing a better job of assessing those costs. So the total cost of ownership calculation, and I expect that most of you are familiar with this, but just as a quick reminder, it helps determine if initially paying a little bit more for a better, more sustainable product from a more sustainable supplier is a smart business decision. So what we're looking at here is not so much the initial cost, but the estimate of the ongoing direct and indirect costs and benefits associated with the purchase of supplies and goods and other kinds of things as well. So what's the benefit of that? You can see what the 6 benefits are here. It just allows us to run the business smarter and also make smarter business decisions. So let me give you a sense of what that calculation might involve. And it's relatively straightforward, but probably worth a quick reminder. So this is the way in which a total cost of ownership worksheet might look. What you start off with are the one-time acquisition and startup costs. So what's it cost to get the product in the first place? So not only the price of the product, but taxes, fees, all of those kinds of things. So to implement this project or acquire this product or goods or services, what's it cost? And of course, that's top of mind for everybody. Then what we do is we take a look at the cost of the cost of operating the product over its useful life. It could go on for 20 years, 15 years, whatever. Sometimes people choose a 5-year evaluation period. It doesn't matter as long as you're consistent in the way in which you're comparing the various bids. So ongoing operating costs, all the things that it's going to take every year in the way of expenses to make this product do what it's intended to do. There's also, in addition, offsetting that, you may actually be able to generate a little bit more revenue because of the acquisition of this kind of product from this kind of supplier. In other words, is your reputation with your customers going to be enhanced to the point that maybe they want to do business with you a little bit more? Because what you're doing is using criteria by which you make this acquisition that resonates with their values as well. It shows that you care about not only the attributes of the product, but the attributes of the supplier, and that you're paying attention to the way in which you can use your buying power as a force in the marketplace to accelerate attention on sustainability issues. So some of them may honor that enough that they will actually want to do a little bit more business with you or attract new businesses. And the same thing applies to employees. Employees may be energized as they learn from the grapevine that the company is acquiring things which are specifically more sustainable things, and they're also wanting to deal with companies that are on the same wavelength they are, which is paying more attention to their environmental and social impacts. And maybe there's going to be a little bit more ability to attract top talent, keep top talent, and engage your employees and get more productivity from them. And that's worth something as well over time. So the initial operating costs are offset by those kinds of things. And then, of course, when you do this kind of assessment, you need to take a look at the cost of disposition at the end of the product's useful life, or trade-in value that might still be possible as well. So you come up with annual cash flows, and what you do is you do the net present value of those annual cash flows. You may also want to take a look at the value that the product is adding to your balance sheet. It could be an asset. It could be an asset worthy of inclusion on your balance sheet. And from some executives' perspective, adding things to your balance sheet, ensuring that you have a more robust balance sheet, is a good thing. So is there an opportunity for that to take place as well? And then the last one is, I think, one that needs more and more attention these days. What's the downside of not procuring this particular product? Is there a risk associated with turning down this one in favor of another option, something that's bid by perhaps a supplier that doesn't give a hoot about sustainability, and the product, frankly, is not all that terrific? It's wasteful, it's energy consuming, it's made of the wrong things, and so on. And if you do that, are some of these operating costs going to be higher? Are some of these customers going to be turned off, employees turned off, and so on? In other words, is there a way to size some of the avoided costs if you don't procure this product? So this is the risk. So this is a very comprehensive set of calculations. So you can make a better informed decision. But this is maybe not a neutral decision. This is kind of an important decision, because if you don't acquire the most sustainable product from the most sustainable supplier, maybe there's a downside. So you take all of this, and we come to the third tool in the sustainability assessment toolkit. And that's called the bid evaluation tool. So the sustainable procurement bid evaluation tool is where the rubber meets the road on this. And it's really the proof that you do care about this, that this stuff matters, that it's not just lip service. It's not just rhetoric. This actually matters. And you know that it matters if you assign a weight to these different attributes, which is going to make sure that it gets the proper attention in the decision. So it's not 100% for how much the product costs. It's something for how much the product costs, plus the way in which this product aligns with the purpose, the values, the strategies of the organization. If acquiring something like this from the wrong folks, frankly, betrays the purpose of the company, the values of the company, the goals and strategies of the company, then that's not a good thing. And if it does align with those things, that is a good thing. Does that matter? Yes, it does. So you have an opportunity here to assign some weight to that. This is what Joanne was referring to as the qualitative value, as well as the quantitative value. So what we're trying to do here is to ensure that the criteria that is being used to assess each of these bids, so bidder A, bidder B, bidder C, and so on, so supplier A, B, and C, all are going to be assessed using the same criteria and the same weight, but their scores are going to be different depending on the extent to which they satisfy that particular criteria. So the weights, of course, add up to 100%. The scores, it could be a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 0 to 100, whatever. There's a score associated with these things. You end up with a weighted score, multiply the weight times the score for that particular bidder, and the one with the best weighted score, the highest weighted score, is probably the one you want to contract with. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that if someone says, yeah, we're using a circular procurement, you say, oh yeah, could we just check? And the things you would check for is the weights that they are assigning to the things, the 4 things that have plus signs in front of them and are in larger font here. So what we're talking about is giving credit, weight, to how sustainable the product is and its content, or how circular it is. Total cost of ownership, how this aligns with your purpose, etc., as well as whether or not the supplier itself is a sustainable enterprise. So you have a way in which you can make those things matter by assigning weight to them. And the rule of thumb is you should be assigning at least 10% weight to each of them. So that's a quick overview of how you would determine whether you are getting full value from this acquisition, qualitative as well as quantitative value, ongoing cash flow value, as well as perhaps balance sheet value, value from a brand point of view with your customers, and making sure that you give appropriate marks for those kinds of things. So that's a tool. It's one of many tools. My website, sustainabilityadvantage.com, has got not only this tool, there's actually another tool, and some of you may need to do this from time to time as executives change in your organization, is to re-justify why you're paying attention to this in the first place. So that's a workbook that can help you do that. That's a free open source tool as well. And there's also a way in which a supplier, especially a small and medium-sized supplier, can self-assess how sustainable they are as a company. This is a tool that is relatively short, only at 36 questions, and allows them to assess the extent to which they are doing the right things on environmental things, the way in which they treat their employees, and their impacts on the community. So lots of good stuff out there. This is all free and open source. It's not the only stuff, of course, but I encourage you to take a look at it, and if it's useful, go for it.
Thank you so much, Bob. Before we bring on Melody, I'm going to take my executive position to ask you some questions before we move on, and then of course we have certainly a Q&A period after as well. But such a wealth of information, and I'm so glad that you got down to the granular level of how to, which is really what we meant to do in this webinar. And there's really no other way when you're talking about measurement, but to actually talk about how what you're measuring and how to do that. So we're benefiting so much from all of the extensive work and the tools that you've showcased here. And I know people are going to take advantage of them, but sort of to back up, and I know, you know, the bulk of your sustainability career sort of comes from a business perspective. I talked about public procurement and governments, and certainly there is obvious public policy commitments they make and targets that they make. And what we've found in working with government is that, you know, the folks that are making the public policy commitments don't actually talk to the procurement functions of government. I'm assuming that that's can be similar as it relates to a business structure as well. So when you're talking about things like staff retention, talent attraction, and even things like measuring reputation, those are those qualitative values that I presented in my opening. How do you get on from a public, from a private sector perspective? How do you get those that are in charge of buying goods and services connected with those functions? Because it could be HR, it could be risk, it could be functions within businesses that don't have anything to do with one another. So this is kind of a human question. What's the first thing that organizations, if for those on the webinar that are working in the private sector, how do they start bridging internally on procurement those values?
Yeah, there are two things in particular that relate to the answer to your excellent question. The first thing is it kind of helps if the company is already into this stuff. If they're not, this could be a bit tough. So when we talk about sustainable procurement, we are assuming that there's some level of executive support for the fact that this is something that the company wants to pay attention to. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard. So one of the things you want to look for is the extent to which the governance structure of the organization is set up so that this stuff matters at the executive level, that they've got goals associated with environmental and social things, as well as all of the usual financial things, and that they acknowledge that their particular performance, their track record on sustainability related things is inclusive of the impacts that are coming from their supply chain, that they're mutually accountable for those things. Otherwise, why would they give a hoot? So right. They really need to understand that when we talk about the sustainability of, for example, around greenhouse gases, we're not just talking about scope 1, we're talking about scope 2 and scope 3. Scope 3 are huge, and many of those are in the supply chain. So if the company acknowledges that it wants to understand that better and make sure that they're dealing with organizations which are paying attention to it, that helps. If they don't, you could be, this could be a centennial project for you. It could be really kind of tough.
Sure.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is this dimension of the HR folks and the finance people when we talk about balance sheet. The operations people. So the people in procurement very often get kind of cubbyholed into sort of an administrative role. But actually they can be a catalyst. They can be a catalyst so that they ask the right questions and make sure that the right other departments are engaged in this. So when you go through a normal procurement, there are 3 different departments that are involved. The procurement department that makes sure the process is handled appropriately. There's the user department that's asking for it in the first place. And there's the finance department that oversees the whole thing to make sure you're not wasting money. So you get the finance department always there, the procurement department always there, and the user department that, that's the trigger for this stuff. So when I was marketing computers to a large province in Canada, and we would get an RFP from them, we were answering that RFP to the procurement function, but the people who were going to crawl through it were the user department and the finance department with the procurement folks. So it's that's that trio. And then what you want to do is to make sure that the finance folks understand the value of engaging these other folks, like the marketing function and how this is going to be received by customers, and the HR function, and whether this is going to be a turn on or turn off for employees. So you end up in a more holistic thing. We're not just buying paper clips here. We're actually using this as an instrument to ensure that the company is more successful internally and externally. So this is far, far more than some little administrative thing. This is huge if we use it properly. And that's the power of procurement that I think it's long overdue that we tapped into.
Well, couldn't agree more. And I think there's, once you're engaging with all of these other, the executive team, the human resource team, the risk management team, the legal team. Once you start to expand, I guess, the type of questions that you're going to be asking the vendors and suppliers you're going to be doing business with, you get this holistic sort of checklist. It's almost like a triage. Are you, first and foremost, the kind of business we want to do business with? And that's some of this qualitative stuff that we're talking about. Do you agree in the same ideology? Have you made the same commitments? Are you contributing to social good or social betterments? And once you pass sort of that, then you go into these other aspects of making the decision whether you're going to buy the product or the service. So, but that's where we're headed. We're not there yet, but that's certainly, and I don't see that a different, whether it's public procurement or private procurement. I think that process and that scope is exactly the same.
Sustainable procurement is a proof point for the sustainability of coming from whoever is in charge of the organization.
Right.
So they're using their buying power to be able to live up to their stated commitment to all of these things. Sure. So if the government of Canada, for example, really does care about the SDGs, wouldn't you like to deal with companies that are paying attention to the SDGs as well? And wouldn't you like to make sure that the performance of the product relative to the 17 goals and so on is going to be what you hoped it would be? Like, let's implement, let's execute on all of these things and make it coherent as a set of strategies. Yes. So to me, sustainable procurement is the acid test. Are you putting your money where your mouth is? And we can help them do that, not only live up to their billing, but also be a force for change.
Couldn't agree more. And on that important note, I have a zillion other questions and they're already coming up through our chat function, but because Melody is in the afternoon where she is, so we want to be able to make sure before she leaves work that we get her in. But Melody has been a champion in her own right in advancing circular procurement, not only really in a Netherlands perspective, but really on a European level. So we're very blessed to have her. She's been patient with us in waiting in the wings. Melody Van Ecker is based in Antwerp, Belgium. So for those of you, the center of very good beer and diamonds. She is a circular economy facilitator with Circular Flanders, which in 2017 established a Green Deal circular procurement in collaboration with The Shift, a Flemish association for cities and municipalities there, and the Better Living Environment Union. So since then, more than 150 organizations have committed themselves to jointly purchasing according to circular models or to facilitate circular procurement products or projects. Specifically under the Circular Flanders banner, Melody is a project manager for a North Sea region project under ProCirc, which is set up to experiment, implement, and learn how circular economy and procurement can benefit the region. And I really love that it says experiment, because that's really where we all are at. And bringing us details on a European and Flemish context of circular procurement measuring success, and very specifically addressing those KPIs that I introduced earlier in my opening around circular procurement projects and their abilities to leverage those 5 business models all the way from Belgium. Melody, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Let me share my screen first. So as Joanne already mentioned, I come to you from Belgium, from Flanders. I work for an organization called Circular Flanders. And we are quite similar to Canada in a way that we speak both Dutch and French. For you, it would be English, of course. It's quite densely populated. We have quite some industry, 3 large harbors there. So yeah, we're really at the center of Europe, and our Flemish government has set 7 transition priorities, and one of them is circular economy. And so my colleagues and I are sort of responsible for supporting that transition to a more circular economy. And so now also several secretaries of the government are responsible for this. So this is sort of taking an integrated approach. And why is circular procurement important to us? I think this resonates with Joanne and Bob have been saying before, is that you can create a huge positive impact with your spending volume. Then this is a case for governments as well as private companies. And we also focus on circular procurement because we believe that demand is key to sort of foster innovation in the suppliers in the market, because there's no good in having a circular product that no one will buy. So this is in brief the approach that we're taking at Circular Flanders. And as you can see, we have thematic agendas on various subjects, but we also believe that circular procurement is one of the levers that works throughout these agendas to really create that transition to a more circular economy. And as Joanne said, we are part of two major projects that are going on circular procurement. So I'll briefly talk about both and then get to the measuring and the defining value after that. So the first one we had is indeed the Green Deal on circular procurement. We sort of stole the idea from the Dutch and then went with it. So this was a project that ran between 2017 and 2019. And we had over 150 participants. So these were all people that were willing to pilot circular procurement, both from governments and businesses. And as you can see, we had a lot of different product groups, a lot of different projects. And one of the main things that people really appreciated was that it was a giant learning network. So we could all learn together, learn from each other. And we also coupled buyers and suppliers so that there could be a real market dialogue. Procurers really felt safe in talking to the market, explaining demands, hearing about innovations, and talk to people face to face. So this was really acknowledged as one of the bigger values. After the Green Deal finished, we decided to share our results on the website that is also available in English. So we have loads of cases, explanation, also the things I will be explaining to you today, examples of suppliers. So it's quite interesting to have a look. And we also have an international learning group on LinkedIn. So if anyone has any ideas, questions, you can reach quite a large audience on that group. So you're all really welcome to join in. And then another important sort of outcome of this Green Deal circular procurement is our circular ambition chart. And I will get into that later on in my presentation. Another project that followed the Green Deal on circular procurement is a European project that we're in that's called ProCirc. So it's also focusing on circular procurement. And as you can see, we have partners from around the North Sea, as the name already sort of points it out. And these are also partners that are public, governmental, or more midfield organizations. And we sort of focus on the sectors that you can see on the left there. So I don't know if it's similar in Canada, but the first thing you have to do is to get your proposal granted for your project. So it looked really nice to put in that we would achieve 20 to 25% reduction in the use of raw materials, the creation of waste, and the emission of CO2. And well, it worked because we got our project granted, but as you will all probably know, it's not that easy to then actually measure these things and report on them. So this is also something I will go into later on in the presentation. And it's not only the partners that I just shown you on the map, but it's also 30 pilots. So people actually doing the work in the field, doing these circular procurements, and the aim is basically to learn from these people, from these pilots. And also, and just within this small region in Europe, we tried to create a sort of common framework. So let alone that we have a global one. So yeah, after this one, I'll go into the circular ambition chart that I showed you before. But first, a slide or a graph that I stole from Mervyn Jones, who was one of the speakers in the earlier webinars. And I think it really clearly states the importance of the preparation phase. So in your procurement journey, it's really important because that is where the impact is created. And it sort of requires you to really put effort into that. And this is probably a different way of operating. It's not that the procurement journey is that different per se, but you have to allow time for it, because a lot of the time I get questions or phone calls from people that are procuring within a month or a few weeks, and they don't have enough time left to really work on this. So my advice would be to start timely if you want to go ahead with a circular procurement. So now the long-awaited circular procurement ambition chart. So this was created within the Green Deal on circular procurement with about 80 different stakeholders. So these were experts, scientists, but also procurers, suppliers. And the idea was that we needed something to move from all this theory and explanation and principles to the actual experiments, to the field. And so what you can see here at the top are circular procurement goals. So these are goals that you can try to set either for your organization or for your procurement. So the chart is really meant to be a basis for dialogue. So you can either, for instance, have it within your organization and say, okay, what do we want to focus on in the next year, for instance? Does this suit our sustainability strategy? Or you could use it for a specific product group or a specific procurement to say, okay, which goals should we achieve with this one? And also, quite importantly, you can use it to communicate with your suppliers, to exactly explain to them what your goals are, what you are aiming for. And so then below this, the numbers are all strategies that you can use to achieve these goals. And some people are really enthusiastic and they want to achieve all of the goals using all of the strategies, but we really recommend just to pick one or two goals and a few strategies to start with. And then you can just learn from that procurement and then go on to a next one. We also have on our website a quick scan that asks you a few questions to see if a certain procurement project would be suitable to start with circular procurement. Just questioning about the strategy of your organization, the market maturity. So just a quick scan to see if your success rate is high enough, because it's always nice to start with something that has high chances of working out. So I'll now give a brief explanation with some examples on how this chart works. The examples I'm giving will cover multiple strategies and goals, but I'll just stick to one for now. So the first one is the facilities company of the Flemish government. They have offices all over Flanders, so they have remote locations. And they started by making a library or an inventory of all of the furniture that they had on all the different locations. So it would be easier for people to share this furniture even between different locations. As well, due to COVID, but already before that, they are shrinking their office spaces. So people will be sharing desks, will be sharing chairs. So the need for the number of furniture is going down. But also they have a framework contract for refurbishment. So part of their own furniture is going to the company that is making new chairs and office tables out of it. And part is off the shelf, so things that came from other sources. One that might be familiar to you is lighting as a service. And I would like to point out at this point that as a service models are not always circular per se, because if you want to close the loop, it's really important to make arrangements on what happens to for instance, the fixtures in this case, after the supplier takes it back. So it's really important to ask for transparency, because if they end up in the bin or in landfill, they're not really circular. But in this case, you can see, for instance, they were modular, they had a reparation contract. So all of these things make that the fixtures can be used for a longer time. They have a longer useful life. They can even have a second life. So this is quite a nice example of how to achieve that. This is an example of a Flemish utility company. So they have a lot of pipes around the country. And they're quite special in a way that they wanted to augment the recycled content in the piping they used. And they just, well, basically asked the suppliers to come up with a plan or an approach in their tender. So rather than just stating what they wanted, they said, okay, we put a certain weighing on it. Please, you explain to us how we could go about this. And they were quite successful at it. This one is a nice export product of Flanders. It's called Facade Click. And as you can see on the bottom picture, they are building facades using bricks and a sort of a Meccano or Lego system. So there's no mortar to be used. So the wall or the facade ends to be up really a material container. So the materials are stored in the facade and they can easily be reused afterwards, have a second or a third life. So they're really designed to be taken apart afterwards. And so they built a facility for psychiatrically ill people in Yale, a small town in Flanders. And they also trained people that have a distance to the labor market to use this and to build with this. So they are both tackling the environmental and the social aspects. And then the last one is maximizing the reusability or recyclability of the materials themselves. So the previous one was more about the components or the product itself. And this is an example of a safety shoe. And this company has really thought about this. So they made sure that there were less components to the shoe. The shoe also has a materials passport. Then they have a reverse logistics system that goes in Belgium and the Netherlands. So they take back the shoes. They know exactly what they're getting back. And they recycle the materials themselves to use in other products that can even themselves then have a second life. So this is really a good thing and a thing to look forward to get transparency, to get this assurance that you know what is going to happen with the product after you stop using it. And now so to the promised indicators. And I must add to this that this is a field that is, well, quite emerging. So it's all of us are still sort of looking on how to go about this. And I'm really grateful for Bob's quite clear explanation. And it's quite hands-on, you know, how you can start doing it. But as he and Joanne also pointed out, the job prescription of procurers sort of broadens. We ask more of them. And so it's not always that easy for these people to know where to start or how to go about this. So for the sake of the circular procurement Green Deal, we wanted something that was quite pragmatic in order to get people to use it and to get some feedback from it. So as you can see here, there are some indicators provided for the different ambitions, different goals, and most of them are based on percentages just to compare the baseline, the business as usual, the linear procurement, to the circular one. But we really did promote having 3 points of measurement. So the one business as usual, then the one in the contract, and then the one after the execution, because it is not always feasible to honor the commitment in a contract, or sometimes you can even surpass it and have a better result. Yes, as I was just saying, it's also important to see if you're challenging the market, because if you want to use procurement as a lever, you don't want to ask below what's possible. And it's also important to evaluate for yourself if you reach the impact that you were aiming for with your procurement. So as I was saying, this is an area that is still evolving. So a slightly different approach is taken in the European ProCirc project. As I mentioned before, we have these 3 indicators. And there it was opted for to compare a baseline and a final outcome. And another approach was to sort of look at the market maturity. So for some sectors, there are already, well, they're quite mature in this monitoring. So for instance, in ICT, they have quite a good idea. So you can actually, in your tender, really ask for this data. In other sectors, they're not that advanced yet, and we believe that it could be a joint effort between the procurer and the supplier, because it would also not make sense to ask for a very costly LCA analysis, and then who would have to pay for it? Would it be the procurer or the supplier? Legally, we are also obliged, if we ask something for something in our tenders, to be able to check on it afterwards. So this would create a whole lot of complicated situations. So one example is the one I gave for the furniture of the Flemish government, and they sort of have a growth trajectory together. So they said it's okay if you can't give us the numbers on CO2 emissions right now, but we have a long-lasting contract. So within 2 years, we want these data from you. So they give them time to report on these indicators. And this is, well, basically, I think it's general for circular procurement that we evolve towards a partnership between procurer and supplier. You shouldn't be enemies. So this is a suggestion that is given within the ProCirc project. Still under discussion. For instance, you can see the weight of materials in kilograms, but it could also in some cases make sense to report on volumes. So the idea is now that we have these 30 pilot project test out these indicators together with their suppliers, and we will gain a lot of valuable information from them, which we can use to educate other procurers, to educate suppliers, and also to make policy recommendations. And then sort of as my final point, I think it was also touched on by Bob earlier. What if you have someone that's really enthusiastic in your organization about circular procurement, but isn't on the right chair or doesn't have really the leverage to get things happening? Well, I think one of the key sort of the key things why circular procurement has such a great chance of success is because it takes into account a business case. It takes into account that companies have to make money. So Bob really explained really well how to calculate a TCO, and we have a nice example of that in Belgium, where a company that does roadside maintenance was using a certain brand of tractors, and they were really emotionally attached to them until they got a new CSR manager, and he started looking into what the main impact factor on the TCO was, and it appeared to be in the operating costs, in the amount of diesel that they were using. And apparently this is not common information that is given by the suppliers, so it took him quite some time to figure it out. But it ended up that a different type or a different brand of tractors was much cheaper in the end, looking at the TCO. So he said it was quite difficult to convince people because they were so emotionally attached. But in the end, the numbers were so clear that, well, they had to switch. And I think this is sort of a step in the process. And as you can see, I think we're moving towards the idea of using a life cycle costing. And it's not to say that everyone has to use these difficult calculations, but I think it's just starting by keeping them in mind. And we will come within a few years at a point where everyone will be using that, but we're not there quite yet. And I think the same goes with TCO. You don't have to calculate it in a perfect way, but just figure out what are important factors, use Bob's tool, and just start thinking in a different way. Just start. And that would be my main message. Don't be afraid. Trying is better than not doing anything at all. So just start, evaluate, and see, learn, and it'll all end be fine in the end. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Melody. And I'll ask Bob to turn on his camera as well, because we're going to move into the joint Q&A. But I just want to pick up on a couple of critical themes that Melody introduced in your PowerPoint. Thank you for that. It's so great to see the examples, live examples. I think it really, kicking the tires is so important to moving the needle, and nobody does it better than the Europeans, and in particular in Flanders and the Netherlands as well. So that this sort of just do it, we're going to steal that from Nike. We wholeheartedly agree with that, and it's part of a theme, the expertise that we're going to bridge in the Canadian context as well, and that's what we've always been relaying to folks. But I find, both of you talked about the human aspect of change management. You came at it from different angles, but at the end of the day, you've got to do some internal educating as well as external educating, so I really appreciate you both mentioning that, and I think that our folks on the line should understand that you're not expected to do this alone in your own functions. And in fact, that you can't. And I'm almost, as the two of you were talking, I was thinking it's almost like a two-step process for me. It's like there's this pre-qualifier that we should be saying, are your values aligned with ours? Do your objectives as a potential vendor and supplier further our objectives, whether they be social or environmental? Because we know that the economic prudency piece is there, the value for price is going to be there no matter what. So, how do these suppliers and vendors further our social and environmental objectives? And that could be the pre-qualifier. And then the TCO really gets into, or the way that, Melody, you've structured yours, how are you delivering on these 5 circular business models? Can really be, the next phase. Once you pass the pre-qualifier, then we sort of test you on these other measurement tools. But one thing I love about the way that you've structured against the 5 business models, Melody, is you're really driving outcome. You're looking at outcome. How do you, in your product or service, deliver on these 5, using these 5 business models on these outcomes? So, it's almost like a menu shop. And I think, for those that are starting their journey, those are really simplified and easy tools that people can mix and match and choose. But I want to talk about the role of the vendor, because, for you, Melody, you talked a lot about, and we've learned this already, that engaging with the vendors to try to baseline the market is so critical. Otherwise, you're going to be putting RFPs or RFIs out there that are completely, far away from what the market can deliver. So can you talk about the how you did that? Is it getting them all in a room? Is it putting out an RFI? Where does a buyer start to touch base with a market?
Yes, I totally agree with you that it's really important, because I've had people calling me, procurers, really disappointed because they put out a tender and they didn't get any offers at all, and they were so excited to begin with. And on the other hand, I've talked to suppliers saying, okay, this is ridiculous. They asked for 15% recycled content and I can already deliver 75. Yeah. So it's really, it's also to do with the nature of procuring officers, because they tend to be quite prudent. And they don't want to break the law. So it's quite new to sort of start this dialogue without sort of keeping a level playing field. And so one way we did it in the Green Deal Circular Procurement is to organize these buyer meet supplier events. So there was a sort of a market where people just could present their product or service, and procurers could walk around and just talk to them. And because we were organizing it, it felt safe to them. And also per product group, we had a sort of a table on the one side where the procurers, on the other hand, were the suppliers, for instance, on lighting or on textiles, workwear. And so they could really talk to each other and say, okay, what do you need? What can you offer? What do you need us to develop? Because if there's not going to be a market, people are not, our suppliers are not really sort of engaged to do more innovation. So this is nice, and this could be one of your jobs, Joanne. But on the other hand, we also encourage to have a request for information, to have a market dialogue in your tendering process. So there are possibilities in European legislation to sort of incorporate that in your procurement process. And I think people just should go through it once or twice just to get a feel for it and know that this is legally completely okay if you all inform them in the same way and ask the same questions. Yeah, you could really benefit from it, I think.
Like a dating service between matching suppliers and buyers. It's sort of what you were on a high level describing. Interesting. And I think, you know, in that way to baseline your vendors, you're actually doing your procurement officers or functions of favor, because you're helping them draft an RFP that actually meets the market where it's at with a little bit of push in a direction. So
that's where we need to be, exactly.
So practical from that perspective. And I don't know, Bob, if you've got an opinion in terms of vendor education. You know, you came at it from, you know, very sort of specific tools, but more broadly, and guess in your experience, and maybe as a vendor, what did you appreciate?
Yeah, it's more, it's like a speed dating service where it kind of helps, as you mentioned earlier, if you share the same values. So if they already care about these kinds of issues and you do too, then the opportunity for the kind of ongoing collaboration that Melody talked about in terms of the vendors and the buyers working together on these issues. If you've got that common ground of values and purpose and things that you care about, that's a great platform from which you can go forward. The second thing is that my experience as a vendor was as part of a very, very large company. 98.2% of the companies in Canada are not very, very large companies. They're small and medium-sized enterprises. 1.1 million companies in Canada are SMEs. And they get an RFP, maybe, if they are on the list of potential providers of a good or service that the government has them positioned to be able to respond to. And they take a look at that, and it's going to take time. I mean, this is for a lot of companies, it's a pain in the neck to go through that, right? So if they start to see criteria in there that are just kind of off the wall to them, the dance is going to stop.
Yep.
And that's a nightmare for buyers. I mean, if nobody bids, then what are they going to do? So it's a bit of a dance, and that's where this meet them where they are approach that Melody talked about, I think, is really, really critical. That you need to be able to stretch each other, but not to the point that you give up. That's part of the art of all of this, as opposed to the science of it. As we try to figure out how to collectively work ourselves towards the state that I was describing, the tool helps you assess. But if they're not ready for it, you got to kind of ease yourself in there. And some of the slides that Melody showed as to where you might focus your attention were brilliant. I mean, you can zero in. You don't have to do the whole ball of wax here. Pick a few and work on them, and then go from there. But you got to get started on it. And a lot of this is starting the mentality as opposed to starting the features and benefits. It's the mentality that we need to work on and be able to show that actually, this is a smart thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
So we're not trying to save the world with this. It's actually good for the business.
Sure, exactly right. And I guess it's like it's a two-way street. Not only are you testing the market by going out there and engaging with them to know how to then inform your RFP processes or your specifications, it's actually demonstrating to the market where you are and where you're headed. These are my intentions. This is where I'm going.
Right.
So, change your product, change your business offering, because that's where I'm headed. And then you can stay competitive, to your point, Bob. about it's a smart idea. So it's a two-way street when you start engaging with your vendors like that. But that's not typical. Usually the procurement officers keep everything under wraps. They don't want to have any discussions. They operate in the dark per se, feeling that they don't want to be seen to be sole sourcing or breaking any of those really critical competitive procurement rules that we know they have to respect. But so it's important to create, I guess, a right atmosphere where you're engaging in vendor suppliers. Questions are coming in, and I'm going to try to summarize them because there are some similar ones coming in. But I want to swap to, staying in, I guess, in the line of vendors and suppliers. Can each of you just respond to the question of, what's the role in the supplier and the vendor in helping to actually measure the questions or provide the information to answer those questions, whether they be in scope 3 product emissions or answering, doing the filling in the values for total cost of ownership. What's the role of the vendor supplier, Bob?
Yeah, I think they need to provide the initial information and be able to back up their claims with some documentation or something of that nature. So if they say they don't have any scope 3 emissions, you might want to poke at that a little bit, like how do they know they don't? Because we all do. So, or they may not understand that there are 15 different sources of them and they're just looking at 2. I think there's a bit of a dialogue that needs to happen so that they understand what the question is asking, because in many cases, it's not intuitively obvious. And the second thing on the TCO thing, when we were providing computer systems to customers, we would provide our version of the TCO to them. But then they would take that and they would use that to go a little bit further and talk about other things that were of interest to them, which they weren't prepared to share with us for whatever reason. So you get into the integrity of the process, and being very, very careful about that. When we were selling computers, we would sell to the user on what criteria they should ask for. But once the bid was out, we weren't allowed to talk to the user. Yep. We talked to the procurement folks and it was like talking to a wall. I mean, the die was cast, right? So we need to honor the integrity of the process and say, okay, those are the rules. Let's tell them what they want to know and be very careful of our credibility and our ethics around all of this, and give them a little bit more information than maybe they asked for in case that's useful as well. So be able to show that you can help them make a smart decision by asking the right questions.
Perfect. Melody, maybe in the context of, how you're screening against those 5 business models, what's the role? And obviously you had some clear winners of folks that could deliver on some of those attributes. What's the role in the vendor supplier, maybe even validating or verifying that they've met those claims?
Yes, I think it's quite important, and as I said, I feel like that's an emerging field still. So in a few years, I believe that the responsibility will lie with the suppliers, and it will be more easy to supply that information. But what we see now is that some of the larger companies are sort of developing their own systems. So you can buy chairs which have platinum sustainability stars, but you have no idea what that means. So it's really important to have this objective information. Because legally we're obliged to be able to check it. So I think what that resonates with Bob is mentioning that you sort of need to ask the right information, because if you put in your tender, explain your sustainability level or your CO2 emission level, it's not really detailed enough, it's not really objective. On the other hand, we have a lot of startups, SMEs, so people that are really starting from a circular perspective, that they really want to develop a circular product and they don't have that much money. So it's really expensive for them to sort of have labels or certificates or to conduct these LCAs or LCC measurements. So we really don't want to sort of put them out of the equation, because these are the guys we want to grow and to evolve. So in brief, to answer your question, I think at the moment it's a shared responsibility and it will evolve in time.
Interesting. Yeah, there's always this rub between, well, do you sole source a company just because they're big enough and have the R&D to be able to meet some of these requirements? And is that the way to go versus, trying to stimulate a market to be able to eventually, competitively and have under a competitive atmosphere, lots of companies that can deliver that. I think there's some interesting things in Procura around public and private partnerships, non-for-profit organizations partnering with private organizations in order to support both. I think there's some interesting things going on. I'm gonna go to the chat question here. Here's an interesting question. Is there any way to leverage international standards measurements when trying to convince private partners and public sector partnerships? So, there are a zillion labels out there. Do you rely on labels? And are there any that you would suggest, you feel confident in doing? Do you dismiss them? What do you do with labels? It helps people make a lot of claims. Melody?
I'd like to go first if you don't mind, Bob.
Of course, yeah.
This is a sort of an iconic example we use in our presentations. I didn't do it today, but so it's perfectly feasible to buy a cradle-to-cradle certificated chair, and then after it breaks, just a simple thing breaks, then you just bring it to landfill. So it's not circular at all. So I think it's really, really important to be mindful of these labels. It's an easy way for people that aren't sort of sure they're starting out. It's an easy way to put them into it, but I think you should be really mindful. And so what we try to recommend is to look up the description of the label. And so what sometimes is done in Flanders is that they say, okay, it can have this label or something similar. Okay. So that you leave the option open, for instance, for startups to sort of prove why they have similarity in their product or in their sustainability circularity, but they haven't paid for the expensive label yet.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly endorse the idea of looking up the information associated with the label so you understand what it's telling you and what it's not telling you. So if you're comparing EPEAT with Energy Star, like what are those things saying that is similar and unsimilar, and do they matter as much as you need them to? So you need to be careful about certifications. It's like an ISO certification.
Yeah.
It's not a level of performance, it's a level of process. So you can, have a ISO 9000 or 1401 kind of certification, but that's talking about the value, the integrity of your process. It doesn't say how well it's working. It's just whether you're managing the process well. So you need to understand what it's intending to help you decide, as opposed to what you hope it's going to help you decide.
Yep. And maybe I'll extend the question. Got a couple more minutes. I spoke about in my opener about the verification piece, which I think if you don't verify the claim or you don't verify the process that these vendors and suppliers may be saying, yes, I can meet this expectation, or I have met that expectation, or yes, I can deliver on that value. If you don't have the verification piece, if it just stops at the evaluation and when it's awarded and off you go, we think that it's can be all for naught. And I know it sort of extends to your point, Melody. I bought the logo. It's on my piece, believe me, but then the practice says something completely different. So maybe each of you can tackle in the last minute or two that we have about, the ongoing process of verification. Do you want to start, Bob?
Yeah, that's a critical question, especially when we're talking about how sustainable the supplier itself is. So who says? Is this a third-party assessment like EcoVadis or
right.
B Corp or some third party, or is this a self-assessment? And I've got a self-assessment tool, so I can see that might be useful to some. But who verified the answers? Yep. So an unverified self-assessment could be a bit of a loose cannon. So what we want to do is make sure that that somebody somewhere says, yes, these answers are valid, audited, certified, whatever the language is you want to put around it. And whether you do that at bid time or whether you do it at contract time, somewhere you want to make darn sure that the claims made by the vendor are substantiated, verified. But the accountant profession, by the way, is not as prepared as we would hope it would be to be able to do that verification. They're working on it, and there is a standard by which they can make an assessment or to use to assure the self-assessment of a company on sustainability. But it's still a bit of a work in progress.
And I would assume, before we get to Melody's points, I would assume that you kind of want a zero tolerance, that if you find out in the process that they've responded positively, but you find out in whatever way that in fact the claim is not there, that, you know, the deal's off.
Yep. And you need to get the word out that the deal's off.
Yeah.
So other vendors understand the repercussions of the consequences of trying to game the system.
For sure. That's great. Melody, anything from you on the point?
Yeah, I really second what Bob has been saying, and I think this also feeds into what we were talking about earlier, that there needs to be cooperation between the contract manager and the procurer, which are usually separate functions. So suppliers know this, that maybe the claims they made aren't looked into afterwards. And also, I think it's important to ask for transparency in the supply chain, and it shouldn't be perfect to start with, and it's okay to explain, okay, there are some things that the company still has to work on, but you can work on this together. Now,
that's a very, very good point, that the expectation is not is not 100%. Nobody's there yet. It's always a work in progress. Thanks for that. It's 12:56 where we are, Melody, well into your dinner time, creeping into your bedtime. So I just want to, before close off, I just want to personally, and of course for my organization, thank you both for your extensive experience and your willingness and generosity of relaying it to us and our registrants today. Continually learning from both of you, and hope this is a start of a partnership and collaboration between us as organizations and individuals. So thank you for that. You could get a barrage or a deluge of emails. I apologize ahead of time. Our registrants are never shy, so they always get in touch with our. So thank you for that in advance. For the registrants, thank you very much for giving of us your time. You can watch the Biden inauguration on your YouTube later, so we appreciate you prioritizing us for today. I want to just let everybody know that RCO CIC is going to be opening a new circularprocurement.ca resource website as an open source to promote tools like Bob's and the work that Melody's doing. House everything as a global center of excellence, or at least a Canadian one, where we're bringing in these global resources and expertise. And so we'll be sending out a notification when that's to be launched, which is days away. We're excited to say, and that's going to be really our platform to continue to work on circular procurement and to spread it far and wide in a Canadian context. Also want to just say to you that we are designing virtual workshops. We have lots of workshops that we've done in person previously in 2019. We're transitioning all of those workshops, whether they be for buyers, suppliers, or vendors, to educate folks around the circular economy, how to use procurement to advance it, and then really this how-to piece, which is, you know, how to start implementing that. So those workshops will be promoted and available to all of you and your constituents. And then the last piece is we are going again to be hosting a World Circular Economy Forum partner and hopefully side event, so doubling up on our efforts in the 2021 context. So coming to Canada in September of 2021. We hope it's certainly in person, at the very least a hybrid event of both in person and online. So look for our notifications around that. We will be hosting a partner event along with the WCEF, hyper-focused on procurement. So, we'd love to be able to host you and have you participate in that in Toronto. A shout out to HP Canada, who has endless support for our work in circular procurement. You're going to hear more from HP through us and their endeavors and their leadership. Again, a shout out to Bob and Melody. Thank you very, very much for your generosity of time and expertise to all of you, thank you very much for joining us. And do be in touch if you want to join the organizations. We're more than welcome you if you want to participate in our resources and tools and information. Again, a warm welcome, and we look forward to collaborating with